Hi everyone, my name is Golli, and I'm here with Miss Peggy Lewis for a project called HerStory, where a few accomplished Trinity alumni volunteer to talk about their careers as well as their time as undergrads at Trinity, and how this school helped them gain success in their lives. Without giving too much away, Miss Peggy Lewis graduated from Trinity in 1977, is a retired Trinity dean, was an aide for the Clinton White House, and was a former ABC News anchor. Thank you, Ms. Lewis, for joining me today. And if I may ask, how are you doing? Okay, that's good to hear. And without further ado, I just wanted you to introduce yourself to everybody. When and where were you born?
Washington, D.C., born and raised. You want the year?
It's all in your comfort zone. Okay, no problem. And how would you describe your childhood / teenage years before coming to Trinity?
I grew up in a Christian home. I had loving parents in Northwest Washington, D.C. I went to Coolidge High School, went to Paul Junior High School. I was a pretty good student. I wasn't a great student. I was a majorette. I was well-rounded. I tutored kids at the elementary school across from my high school.
Okay.
I spent my summers doing upward bound programs at the recreation center. So I've always been one who thought it important to give back, to help young people. I've always been involved with tutoring or giving back or upward bound programs or things like that. So all of those kinds of things before I came to Trinity. So yeah.
Okay. And did you know as a child what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Well, I came up at a time. First of all, I'm African American, and I know that I'm one of the paler ones, and people don't always know what I am. But, if you know the history of our country, then we come in all colors. And my family looks like, goes from very light to very dark.
Okay.
And I think it's really important to state that because people don't always know. I think in a time now where, I grew up in a segregated time, and I didn't know. I thought I wanted to be a teacher because my mom was a teacher. My parents, my aunts were teachers or principals. And at that time, coming up in the 60s, there was a limited view of what Black people could do. There were safe things. You could be a doctor. You could be a lawyer. You could be a teacher.
Okay.
But beyond that, your parents worry. They want to make sure you can get into something that was stable. And there weren't a lot of opportunities open to Black people at that time. And so, I was going to do like my family did, I was going to be a teacher.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm a history minor, so I'm really interested in, especially my classes this semester, they talked about mostly events surrounding the civil rights movement. So can you talk about that a little bit and how that impacted your, childhood?
My parents and my cousins were the first to integrate the Northwest Shepherd Park neighborhood. They were among the first. There was a covenant here. I don't know if you're aware of a covenant, which said the white people who owned houses should not sell to Black people, should not sell to people of color because they wanted to keep the neighborhood a certain way. So when my parents bought their house, the man who sold it to them broke the covenant. Okay. My cousins, when they bought a house 2 blocks from where my parents bought their house, the person who sold them the house broke the covenant to sell. And so, it was a time when Black people moved into a neighborhood, white people would flee to the suburbs. I went to Coolidge High School, which was like many schools in D.C. had once been all white, but they fled to the suburbs and left us a school that had been, neglected. You could see the markings on the desk. We got hand-me-down books. The school was falling apart. I mean, I think we saw in ways the discrepancies or the ways in which if you were Black, there were certain expectations that weren't given to the others, that weren't given to the majority population. But I will have to say this, my parents protected, my cousin's parents and parents at that time protected us from the horrific things of racism. So my teachers were Black, my doctors were Black, my dentist was Black, the bus drivers were Black. I grew up in DC at the time, it was called Chocolate City. So we were very protected. When we moved into the neighborhood, we knew there weren't a lot of Black people here, but we were still kept from those kinds of things that maybe showed inadequacies or showed the racism. We knew about things like traveling. My parents were very careful about where they stopped. If we traveled south to see anybody, if we traveled, my cousins, my aunt's husband was from Mississippi, and they were always scared to go certain places at certain times because there were sundown towns and you had to be careful where you stayed. And there was a thing called a Green Book that showed Black people where were safe places to go and where they weren't. So, it was a time in which, there was the argument between Martin Luther King and Black Panthers. What was the road to equality? Was it through violence? Was it through nonviolence? And I remember writing a paper in high school thinking, I love the Black Panthers. And I thought, this is how we should respond to racism. But I also studied Martin Luther King, and I thought, well, that's the Christian way, and that's the way of nonviolence. But for me, I didn't think it was either or. I thought it was both. So, I didn't really like history until I got to grad school, because the way history was taught when I was in junior high and high school, Black people were slaves and white people found America, and they didn't tell the truth about our history. And I think that's the problem that we have right now. We have not taught the truth about our history, which is why we've got a lot of problems right now. That Columbus didn't discover this. He came, and it was a place that was already inhabited by indigenous people who were slaughtered and wiped out so that they could take this land. People were brought from Africa, enslaved to develop this country. And so until we tell the truth about that, I think that the polarization that we see is only going to increase.
Thank you for that. And just to switch it up a little, so why Trinity? What brought you to Trinity, and why was it your first choice?
No, it wasn't my first. I wanted to go to Howard and continue to be a majorette. My dad worked in the federal government. He was a supervisor. My dad wanted me to go to Trinity because he had a lot of interns from colleges, all the places all over the DC area. And the ones from Trinity, he thought were smarter and more confident and sharper. And so he's like, I want you to go to that school. And I was like, I don't want to go to that school. It's all girls and it's mostly white. No, I don't want to go. But he said, try it. He made a deal. Try it for a semester. If you don't like it, well, my mom said this, if you don't like it, you can transfer. My mom went to what was then DC Teachers College, which was on the campus of Howard. My uncle graduated from Howard's School of Pharmacy, and my grandfather graduated from the School of Divinity at Howard. So I wanted to go to Howard. But my dad wanted me to try it, and I got there and I didn't like it at first, but it grew on me.
Okay. And after these initial sentiments of not liking the school, how would you describe your overall experience at Trinity after that?
Well, when I got to Trinity, in my class, there were not a lot of Black people, but there were about 6 of us. And one of them became one of my dearest friends. She's to this day, Maggie Williams, who is another graduate of Trinity. And she's the reason I got to work at the White House. And she was assistant to the president, et cetera. But she's another one who's fabulous. But so my experience, Trinity opened my eyes to a lot of things. Like I say, I had a limited view of what was open to me and what opportunities could be. And when I got to Trinity, like I said, I wanted to be a first grade teacher, and that's fine. But Trinity, the white women at Trinity, the other students were talking about being analysts on Wall Street. And I'm like, what's Wall Street? They wanted to be museum curators. And I'm like, what is that? What's a curator do? What's a museum curator? And so I began to see there are other things, and how come they know all this stuff and we don't. So it was a catch-up experience for me. My freshman advisor, Lori Spunt, is one of the reasons I stayed at Trinity. She was like a mentor to those of us who were Black in that freshman class, because it was kind of overwhelming at that time. You know, we stuck together. It was not a lot, but there were some Black upperclassmen who said, don't get involved in anything on campus. They had a more militant view. And I was militant too. And I was trying to go over to Howard every chance I got with my other friends, you know. But as I began to take classes, you know, Trinity really did open my brain, you know, in ways that I had not thought possible before. Lori had us reading. It's the first time I read The Bluest Eye. You know, she opened us to Black authors, and which was not something I got at Coolidge, you know. The curriculum was that Eurocentric curriculum and not really one that taught Black history or Black authors. So Lori Spunt at Trinity opened our eyes and had us reading things like that. There was a freedom of intellectual pursuit at Trinity that just opened me up. I took Jewish history from a rabbi for my religious class. And as a Black woman coming out of, you know, Presbyterian Baptist background, to study Jewish religion from a rabbi was fascinating. You know, I started working on the school newspaper and became the first Black editor of the Trinity Times at the time. So yeah, it opened me up to things. And that experience, I like to write, I like to talk. So I said, I want to be a journalist. And Trinity had opportunities to do internships. And, you know, I got to do an informational interview, which let me talk to news directors. I went and interviewed news directors at the television and radio stations in DC. And, you know, Trinity taught me how to do an informational interview. You go, you're not looking for a job, you're just looking for information. And I asked them what they look for when they hired somebody, what should somebody major in if they want to be a journalist? What kind of things should they be doing? And because of those interviews, and this was about, I guess, my sophomore year. By my junior year, one of those news directors I had interviewed called me and said he had a part-time desk assistant job at WTOP. Was I interested? Well, I jumped on it. And that information interview got me started, and I've been unemployed ever since. By the time I was a senior, I was a full-time writer at WTOP Radio, and that launched my journalism career. So Trinity was eye-opening and door-opening for me.
All right. And what professional accomplishments are you most proud of?
I was a television journalist. That was really good. I mean, I covered coups in Haiti and earthquakes, an earthquake in El Salvador, hurricanes in Miami, riots, all kinds of things. Journalism really gives you a really a front row seat to history, a window into the world. And that was really, but you know, then I got to work at the White House. You know, I got to travel with the president and First Lady. I got to work for Hillary when she was First Lady. Again, Trinity connections. You know, if I had not met Maggie, who we became really, I talked to her yesterday. I mean, we're very good friends. Our families became friends. So Trinity gave me a good friend and good networking connections. I know some other alums from Trinity who've been impactful in my life. I gave Trinity women internships in some of my jobs. So, you know, it's a thing, it's a blessing to be able to know people that you meet in college and stay friends with. And I always tell my students, be careful, be nice to the person sitting next to you. You don't know where they're going to end up. So those people that you're in college with right now could have a huge impact on your life. Those women at Trinity, you see all the, you know, networking opportunities, all the fabulous women who come out of Trinity. You never know when they're going to offer an opportunity that you can take advantage of.
What legacy do you hope to leave behind?
I always tell my students, after I left journalism to go work at the White House. And that was really interesting to work in the media office there and then to help in Hillary's office to move there. I think I always say I want my students to make a difference wherever you go. I think it's important to, bloom where you're planted, to make sure you have an impact. For my journalism students, I would say, if you're not making a difference in the newsroom, it's not about you. It's about the stories you tell. It's about the people that you put on television or the people that you put on the radio. It's about the stories that you tell that change lives. So it's not about, your celebrity. It's not about your personal progress. It's about the progress of those people that you are telling stories about. So I think as a legacy, to make the world a better place, to be a voice for the voiceless. I think that is a legacy that journalists can do. And I just think, one of the things I wanted to do after working at the White House, after working for a cabinet secretary, because in the second term I went with Alexis Herman to Labor Department. And then I went to work for Marian Wright Edelman at the Children's Defense Fund. And Marian always said, service is the price you pay for the space you occupy. I think it's so important to give back. I was a big sister with Big Brothers Big Sisters. I helped build a couple of habitat houses, one in DC and one in South Florida. I think it's important to use what gifts God has given you to help somebody else. I think that is so important.
Okay. And what was your life's biggest obstacle for you? And did your Trinity sisters or mentors provide any assistance to that?
Repeat the question.
What was life's biggest obstacle for you? And did your Trinity sisters or mentors assist you in any way?
Biggest obstacle? I don't, that's a good question. I don't think I've considered obstacles. Things like, a news director once told me I'd never be on television because my face was too round. Something like that. And I remember thinking, well, I can't change that. And this was like 30 pounds lighter than this. I mean, this was years ago. But I remember thinking, that's something I can't change, but I can make sure I have a good voice and I can make sure that I do the best writing I can do. And when I was anchoring on television, I wanted to find that news director and say, I'm on TV every day. So you can't, I think Trinity gives you the confidence to know you can make a difference in the room. I like how if we're not allowed in the room, we make a way in the room. And I can remember at the White House going into meetings where it's all men and people look at you like, what are you doing here? And I would say, well, I'm here for the First Lady. So there's a reason I'm here. But it's also knowing when to speak up and when to have an impact. And I know I can look at specific instances in which being in the room made a difference. My perspective made a difference. My experience made a difference. And I think that Trinity gives you that kind of confidence. And when you see what women from Trinity are doing, Nancy Pelosi is a rock star. I mean, it's amazing the kind of power she has wielded and the kind of the difference she has made. Kathleen Sebelius, health secretary, Peggy O'Brien is now the Shakespeare, library. Peggy's husband helped me write my first syllabus when I started teaching at Howard. I think the kinds of connections that you make and people who are willing to help you is huge. Look, Pat McGuire was a couple of years ahead of me when I was at Trinity. And she then became president of Trinity. And when I was anchoring in Miami, she gave me an award for, for being a journalist and representing Trinity. And then she hired me, after I got my PhD to come to Trinity. And I helped to put together the journalism and media studies program. That's my baby. And the strategic communications program in the graduate school. So it came full circle for me. And, if Pat hadn't been president, I don't know if I'd been hired, but what a connection, what networking possibility, that's such a blessing. And, this is not anything that I think any of us did. I give it to the Lord. I mean, only God can make your life like that. I mean, isn't that amazing? Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Truly. And then these final questions is just passing the torch to current and future Trinity students. What is one vital piece of advice you would give to current and future Trinity students?
Come with an open mind. Don't be like me and spend the first few weeks going, I don't know, what is this about? Be open to lifelong learning. Be open to opportunity. Be willing to get to know the people in the room. You should know your teachers and your professors. How did they get started? Where did they come from? Their careers are amazing, and they can help you with the kinds of things you're trying to do. I think it's important to talk to just try to learn everything you can. I tried to soak up everything I could, every opportunity. If you have an opportunity to study abroad, do that. I would also say, get a passport, travel, dream big, audacious dreams. When I told my parents I wanted to be a journalist, they were like, what? You couldn't believe it. But they couldn't be anybody prouder when they would watch me on television or, see my stories and be able to come and, see what I'm doing. So make your parents proud. Make yourself proud. And I think it's so important, the lifelong learning. Read about different cultures. Meet different people who are different from you. We can't just all stay in the same box. It's so important to broaden your horizons. One of the things I think was a gift as being a journalist and also coming from Trinity and being open to other things. I have Cuban friends, Korean friends, white friends, all kind of people. I've traveled all over. I've tasted great kinds of foods and all kinds of different music. That makes your life rich. The more you can grow, the more you're exposed to. Learn a different language, go to different places. Don't be stuck in one world. There's a huge world out here. Get to know as much of it as you can.
All right. And what do you hope for Trinity to achieve in the next 50 years?
Well, I love that it's become a haven for women of color. I can't tell you how proud I am of that. I think that it is important to have all people at the table. I think diversity is so important. I think that, it could be more diverse in terms of having more white girls return to Trinity so that there could be a cross, pollination of cultures. So I think that's important. I hope that Black and Hispanic girls get to know each other really well and are not isolated and in their own cocoons. I think it's so important to know each other's history and culture, to share each other's music and food. There's more that we have in common than not. And I think that is something I wish for the future, that it is diverse on many levels and that there is a sisterhood that crosses all boundaries.
Well, Miss Peggy, this actually wraps up this interview. I wanted to thank you again for your time. I was nervous at first, but as we kept talking, I relaxed, and I'm actually very happy that I got to interview you. I learned a lot, and it encouraged me to keep going because I'm in my junior year.